Hello, this is Javier, and today we're going to talk about World War II and the identification systems used to send people to concentration camps in Nazi Germany. How did the Nazis identify Jews during the horrific era of World War II? This question, as simple as it may seem, is laid with complexities. The process of identification wasn't as clear-cut as we might perceive today. It wasn't merely about surnames or places of employment. Consider this. In today's world, we're identified by our social security numbers, our visas, and other forms of official documentation. But back then, in the tumultuous times of the 1940s, such forms of identification were not as prevalent or as systematized. The identification of Jews in Nazi Germany was a process shrouded in prejudice, manipulation, and fear. It was a process that was far more intricate than just tagging individuals based on their names or their jobs. So let's delve deeper into the different theories and historical facts that reveal how Jews were identified in Nazi Germany. One theory that has been widely discussed revolves around the role of documentation. In the dark era of Nazi Germany, official documents such as birth certificates, marriage certificates, and passports played a significant role in the identification of Jews. These documents were meticulously scrutinized to trace Jewish ancestry. The Nazis were not interested in religious beliefs or practices, but rather they were obsessed with genealogical records, an obsession that was reflected in their meticulous record keeping. Let's delve a bit deeper into this. Birth certificates were examined to determine the religion of an individual's parents and grandparents. Marriage certificates were scrutinized to verify the racial purity of a union. Passports, too, were inspected for any hints of Jewish ancestry. This obsession with documentation was not just a bureaucratic exercise, it was a weaponized strategy aimed at isolating and dehumanizing an entire segment of society. The infamous Nuremberg laws of 1935 further underscored the importance of documentation. These laws defined Jewishness based on ancestry rather than religious beliefs. Under these laws, someone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was classified as a Jew, regardless of whether they identified with the Jewish religion or not. Even if someone had only 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents, they were still considered Jewish if they were part of a Jewish community or married to a Jew. This definition of Jewishness was not based on faith or culture, but purely on bloodlines. The use of documentation in this manner was a calculated move by the Nazi regime. It was an attempt to give a veneer of legitimacy to their racial purity ideology. It allowed them to track, isolate, and ultimately exterminate millions of innocent people. But let's not be fooled into thinking that this was a foolproof system. There were numerous instances of forged documents, hidden identities, and lives lived in the shadows. But that's a story for another time. But documentation was not the only method employed for identification. The Nazis also relied heavily on community knowledge and social networks to identify Jews, but we'll dive into that in the next scene. Another important aspect was the role of local communities in this identification process. Let's delve into how this facet played out during the harrowing times of World War II. Local knowledge and community networks were instrumental in identifying who was Jewish. It's hard to imagine, but in many cases, neighbors turned against neighbors, friends against friends. The community's intimate knowledge of each other, built over years of living side by side, became a tool used to single out and persecute individuals based on their heritage. Betrayal within communities was sadly commonplace. As fear and propaganda took hold, some individuals chose to become informants, revealing the identities of their Jewish neighbors to the Nazi regime. These acts of betrayal were driven by a variety of motivations, whether it was fear, a misguided sense of patriotism, or even the promise of personal gain. Notably, we can't discuss the role of communities without touching on the controversial role of the Jewish councils, or Judenrat. These councils were Jewish administrative bodies appointed by the Nazis, forced to carry out their orders within Jewish communities. The Judenrat faced impossible choices, often having to decide who among their community would be sent to concentration camps. Their role remains a contentious topic in Holocaust studies, as they were seen by some as collaborators, even though they were victims themselves, trapped in an impossible situation. So the community wasn't just a backdrop to the horror of the Holocaust. It was an active participant, a complex web of relationships that was exploited and manipulated, leading to unimaginable consequences. As we can see, local communities played a crucial role in the identification of Jews, but there's still more to the story. But what about those who were misidentified as Jews? Let's delve into the unfortunate cases of those who were mistakenly targeted. In the chaotic tapestry of World War II, there were indeed instances where non-Jews were erroneously identified as Jews. This misidentification could have been due to a variety of reasons. Perhaps a similar sounding surname, a misinterpreted piece of information, or even a case of mistaken identity. The consequences were nothing short of tragic. These innocent individuals were thrown into a nightmare not of their making, subjected to the same harsh treatment, and in many cases met with the same grim fate as the Jews. They were victims of a system that was not only inherently flawed, but also cruelly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. These tragic cases of misidentification further highlight the grotesque nature of the Nazi regime's identification process. So, as we've learned, identifying who was Jewish in Nazi Germany was a complex and multifaceted process. It wasn't as straightforward as checking a last name or place of work. Official documentation played a significant role, but it was far from the only factor. Community networks and social connections often held vital clues, revealing much about a person's religious and ethnic identity. However, this system wasn't foolproof. Misidentification occurred, leading to tragic consequences for those mistaken as Jews. This points to the chilling reality of the Nazis' methodical yet deeply flawed system of identification. The nuances of language, accent, and even the neighborhood one lived in all contributed to this intricate web of identification. It was an imperfect and horrifying system born out of prejudice and used to justify unspeakable atrocities. While the identification process was complicated and deeply flawed, it was a crucial part of the Nazi systematic persecution and extermination of the Jewish people. I hope you enjoyed this video about such a flawed system that started a mass genocide thanks to Hitler's mentality of an Aryan race, and the propaganda he built demonizing Jewish people during World War II. Before doing this video, I didn't know with the helps of Jews themselves. Eventually, the Nazi Party created a sanctioned list. Especially interesting was discovering the role of the Judenrat and how they betrayed their own people. I can do a whole video about that. It's heartbreaking. In the 1930s, Nazi authorities instituted new naming policies that compelled all Jews to only bear names that were selected from a list sanctioned by the Nazi government. When I was 12 years old, my mom and dad took me to a museum where I saw thousands of shoes from Jewish people, man, woman, and children that died on Auschwitz concentration camp. Imagining that a lot of people died because they were just assigned a name from a list, little did they know by registering that name they would die in World War II. If you like this video, please Like, comment, and subscribe. I greatly appreciate your support.